The drive home from Liam's always felt longer late at night. The clock on my dashboard glowed faintly, the numbers a hazy suggestion of 2 or 3 a.m. 20 minutes wasn't far, but the houses out here were islands in the darkness, separated by stretches of winding road. Rain slicked the asphalt, reflecting the scant light, and the oppressive lack of street lights forced me to drive with a white-knuckled grip on the wheel, every shadow a potential threat. 5 minutes in, the familiar red glow of the traffic light appeared. I braked, the wipers struggling against the downpour. Across the intersection, a blue sedan sat askew, intruding slightly into my lane. Its headlights blazed, illuminating nothing but the rain. Yet it remained stubbornly still despite the green light. Was something wrong? Had they stalled? Or were they simply asleep, oblivious to the world? A shiver of unease traced its way down my spine. When my light finally turned green, I inched forward, carefully navigating around the stationary car. A quick, surreptitious glance into their rain-streaked windows yielded nothing but blurry shapes. No sooner had I passed them and accelerated back up to speed than the blue car lurched into motion, its headlights suddenly filling my rearview mirror. It wasn't broken down after all. My eyes flicked between the road ahead and the growing presence in my mirror. I wasn't prone to paranoia, but the whole scenario felt deliberate, staged. Another minute crawled by, the rhythmic swish of my wipers the only sound besides the hum of the engine. Then the blue car's headlights intensified, expanding in my mirror until they threatened to swallow my entire field of vision. They were mere feet from my bumper, an aggressive presence in the treacherous weather. My breath hitched. This was beyond uncomfortable. It felt menacing. I tore my gaze from the mirror, focusing on the rain-swept road ahead. That's when the small orange glow of the low tire pressure warning illuminated on my dashboard. A common enough signal, yet its appearance now felt impossibly ill-timed, a cruel joke orchestrated by some unseen force. My eyes darted back to the mirror. The blue car was still there, a relentless shadow clinging to my rear. Just 4 or 5 minutes from the supposed safety of my neighborhood, a new light began to flicker on my dashboard. An angry red icon, flat tire. My stomach plummeted. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The blue car, the odd behavior, the sudden tire warnings. They had done something. I pressed on the accelerator, desperate to make it closer to home, but the car began to list precariously to the left. I had no choice but to pull over. As I coasted to a stop on the rain-soaked shoulder, the blue car mirrored my movements, its headlights cutting through the darkness just behind me. My hand hovered over my phone. I should have called someone the moment I parked, but a paralyzing blend of fear and morbid fascination kept me rooted. What were they going to do? Even if I had called, would it have made a difference? Probably not. The silence was shattered as 3 car doors sprang open in unison from the blue sedan. 3 figures emerged, their shapes indistinct in the rain-streaked darkness. I had mere seconds to register their approach. They converged on my car with alarming speed. One of the men lunged towards my window, his fist hammering on the glass. He was yelling something, his words lost in the drumming rain. Through the distorted glass, I saw the glint of metal, a gun pointed directly at me. Time seemed to warp. I reached a trembling hand toward the door lock, a futile gesture. But before I could react, a deafening crash erupted from the rear of my car. The back window imploded. A hand snaked through the jagged opening, fumbling for the rear door handle. It clicked open. They were all yelling now. The man in the back seat reached across to unlock my own door. I remained frozen, my hands raised in a pathetic display of surrender. The moment my door swung open, the man with the gun grabbed my arm, yanking me from the relative safety of my car and slamming me onto the cold, unforgiving asphalt. The rain plastered my hair to my face. The gun pressed against the back of my head. I was being robbed and possibly beaten, yet it all felt strangely distant. I think it was my mind's desperate attempt to create a buffer to distance itself from the sheer terror. A shout from one of the men by their car broke the strange stillness. The grip on my arm tightened, then a sharp, brutal force slammed into the back of my head. My skull cracked against the pavement. I wasn't even sure if he'd hit me with the gun or just his fist. Everything felt numb and disconnected. I heard the heavy thud of their car doors closing, followed by the roar of their engine. Their taillights disappeared into the rainy night. I rolled over slowly and tried to push myself up. My pockets were empty. My phone was gone. I was stranded, injured, and alone. With a surge of adrenaline, I managed to get back into my crippled car. The agonizing screech of metal on asphalt filled the air as I limped the remaining distance home. Once inside, trembling, I called the police. The investigation yielded little. The only solid piece of evidence was the deliberate placement of small, crudely fashioned tire spikes at the intersection where I first encountered the blue car. I had been incredibly unlucky to hit one, but maybe fortunate it wasn't all four tires. The chilling realization that someone had laid a trap on my route home haunted me. I was 24 years old, living alone with my dog Bear in my cozy townhome. 2 years of happy independence, erased in a single terrifying night on a rain-slicked highway. The day was a study in gray, the sky a heavy blanket of clouds that wept a steady, relentless rain. It was my day off, a precious reprieve from the demands of work, and I had been contentedly lost in the endless scroll of my phone, cocooned in the familiar comfort of my living room armchair. 8 p.m., just an hour before my usual bedtime, the early darkness amplifying the cozy atmosphere inside. Bear, my small, fluffy terrier mix, who resembled nothing so much as a living teddy bear, had been a silent sentinel by the back door for a while, his gaze fixed on the rain-streaked world outside. Suddenly, he emitted a low whine, a soft, insistent sound that always preceded his urgent need to relieve himself. He padded over to me, nudging my hand with his wet nose. I sighed, bookmarking my place, and rose to let him out. The backyard of my townhome was small, defined by a low wooden fence that separated it from my neighbor's equally compact spaces. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give Bear a patch of grass and me the peace of mind that he wouldn't wander off. I closed the door behind him and stood in the kitchen, the rhythmic drumming of the rain a soothing backdrop to the quiet of the house. Not long after, maybe 15 or 20 seconds, a sharp whimper cut through the sound of the rain, followed by a frantic, high-pitched bark. It was a sound I'd never heard from Bear before, a cowering bark that spoke of genuine fear, of something he was desperately trying to escape. A knot of anxiety tightened in my chest. I rushed to the back door and peered out, seeing Bear scrambling back towards me, his usually wagging tail tucked tightly between his legs. Once he was safely inside, I leaned my head out into the rain, scanning the small backyard. My first thought was a coyote, though they were rare in our neighborhood, or maybe a stray cat had startled him. But the fence line was empty, the rain-soaked grass undisturbed. I knelt down, checking Bear for any signs of injury, running my hands through his damp fur. He seemed physically unharmed, but his eyes were wide and his small body trembled. I locked the back door, a prickle of unease crawling up my spine. Bear never acted like this. His sudden terror was deeply unsettling. He stayed close to me for the rest of the night, a furry weight on my lap as I tried to distract myself with a book. But for the next 30 minutes, he remained hyper-vigilant, his head constantly snapping up, his gaze fixed on each window and door in turn, as if expecting some unseen threat to materialize. 45 minutes crawled by, the silence punctuated only by the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the hall and Bear's occasional nervous twitch. Then his small body stiffened. He turned his head slowly, his ears flattening against his skull, a low, guttural growl rumbling in his chest. His gaze was fixed on the large window behind me, the one that looked out onto the side alley. "What is it, boy?" I murmured, turning to follow his line of sight. And then I saw him. Pressed right up against the glass, mere feet away, a man's face stared back at me. His features were indistinct in the dim light filtering through the blinds, but his eyes were dark and intent, his gaze unwavering. He was almost pressed against the glass, his breath fogging the cold surface. A strangled scream escaped my lips. I recoiled, stumbling backwards, knocking over a lamp in my panic. The man outside didn't flinch. Then, with a sudden, jarring movement, he turned and sprinted away down the side of the house, disappearing into the rainy darkness. Bear erupted into a frenzy of barking, his small body trembling even more violently. The sudden chaos amplified my own fear. I scrambled to close the blinds, then frantically checked all the other windows, ensuring they were securely shut. From the fleeting glimpse I'd gotten, I hadn't recognized the man. Who was he? What was he doing outside my house, staring in? Why hadn't he tried to open a door or window? I strained my ears, trying to discern any sounds that might indicate he was still lurking nearby, but the relentless drumming of the rain against the roof and windows drowned out everything else. Bear eventually calmed down, his frantic barks subsiding into nervous whimpers. I stayed up for a long while, every shadow in the room seeming to hold a potential threat. Finally, exhaustion won, and I went upstairs. Bear nestled securely beside me in my bed. Sleep was a long time coming, my mind a whirlwind of unanswered questions and unsettling images. But after what felt like an eternity, I finally drifted off. I woke with a start, disoriented. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed a soft blue, 3:17 a.m. Beside me, Bear was standing rigidly by the bedroom door, his small body tense, his gaze fixed on the dark wood. It was a deeply unsettling sight, waking to his silent, unwavering attention. But before I could even process the strangeness of it, I heard something below me. A man's voice, low and indistinct, carrying faintly through the floorboards, and then, moments later, another man's voice, answering from the opposite side of the house. Their footsteps were heavy and unhurried, and they weren't even attempting to whisper. It was as if they didn't care if I knew they were inside my home. My bedroom door was locked, a flimsy barrier against an unknown threat. I had nowhere else to go. Heart pounding, I moved over to Bear, gently trying to keep him calm. I scooped him up, his small body trembling against mine, and retreated to the corner of my room, huddling behind the relative bulk of my bed. Time seemed to stretch, each silent second amplifying the terror. It took a while for the horrifying realization to fully sink in, but then it struck me with chilling force. I hadn't heard any more noises in the past minute. No footsteps, no voices, just an unnerving silence. My hand trembled as I reached for my phone on the nightstand. I dialed 911, whispering my address as softly as I could into the receiver. As I spoke to the operator, Bear emitted a low, guttural growl, his small body vibrating with tension. Then a frantic series of barks and whines erupted as two distinct sets of footsteps began to ascend the stairs. "Please," I begged the operator, my voice barely a whisper, "send someone immediately. They're coming upstairs." The two men began talking again, their voices louder now, but their words were still muffled by the closed bedroom door. Then one of them spoke clearly, his voice surprisingly calm amidst the terror that gripped me. "Hey, we just want to talk. We're not here to hurt you." A strangled scream tore from my throat. "I called the cops. Get out of my house." Panic clawed at me, a desperate, suffocating wave. I didn't know what else to do. There was a brief pause, the silence thick with unspoken menace. Then, the same calm voice spoke again. "We're here to help you." I didn't respond, my breath catching in ragged sobs as I tried to muffle my crying. A heavy thud against the door. "Open the door." The silence returned, broken only by the sound of their breathing on the other side of the thin wood. It felt like a lifetime passed, a whole minute of strained, terrifying quiet, before I heard one set of footsteps retreat back down the stairs. I couldn't tell where they went, downstairs, or if they had left the house entirely, but I was almost certain that only one set of footsteps had moved away from my bedroom door. The silence that followed was absolute, the heavy breathing gone. Then, in the far distance, the faint, ethereal wail of sirens began to grow louder. A fragile sense of safety, a tiny flicker of hope began to bloom in the darkness. As the sirens drew closer, the heavy footsteps downstairs erupted into a frantic scramble, the sound of running feet pounding on the wooden floor. But now, a new wave of fear washed over me. Where was the other man? It seemed impossibly unlikely that he was still standing silently by my door, yet I could have sworn I hadn't heard him leave.